From wherever you are around the world, welcome and thank you for joining us. Today we are exploring... Oh, I forgot. Does anybody know? That's right, Batman and Psychology with Dr. Travis Langley. Dr. Travis Langley is a professor at Henderson State University and the author of Batman and Psychology. Welcome to the circle, Dr. Langley.
Greetings.
Well, this is a great topic. I'm a big comic book fan. I love comic books. And just thinking about a psychologist exploring the mind of the Caped Crusader is very fascinating to me.
If you're going to look at the psychology of one superhero and his enemies, it has to be Batman.
That's right. Can you tell us what got you motivated to pick him out of all the superheroes?
Well, he's the one who is a superhero because of his psychology. I mean, Superman and Spider-Man, they're heroes because of their psychology, but they're super for other reasons. One's an alien. One got bitten by a spider because he wanted the wrong place in the lab. Batman made himself. He decided, I shall become a bat. I shall turn myself into an urban legend, a fantastic, larger-than-life figure to take on evil. And because he defined himself, and he is this fantastic creature of the night because of his psychology, you also get a really rich rogues gallery where they're also defined by their psychology. With Superman, to come up with an enemy, you start off with what will challenge his powers. But Batman's powers are his character, are his personality. And so when you come up with a challenge for Batman, you start with what would be a challenge for this individual. So you come up with, someone who challenges him intellectually, the Riddler, someone who is a variation of the Bruce Wayne side of life with the Penguin, who wants to go for the posh high society look. You have the grim brooding hero who looks like a monster, so his ultimate arch enemy is the bright laughing monster who looks like a clown. And you go on and on through this rich gallery of enemies, and they are so diverse because of his psychology.
That's truly fascinating stuff. Before we start going into Batman himself, I have a couple general questions I want to know in regards to comic books. Because I know you also teach classes on psychology of media, if I'm correct.
Yeah, every spring I teach a media class. Normally I teach classes on mental illness or forensic psychology, but every spring I do one media-related class.
Do you think comic books, and we can talk specifically about Batman if you like, do they increase a negative social behavior such as biasness, prejudices?
Well, anything has the potential for affecting people's behavior and affecting biases and prejudices, for good or bad. Comic books, they tend to fight prejudice and fight biases because they make you think about a variety of different kinds of people. Literature itself, you get inside the head of a character that you just see on film. You don't get them depicted the same way. With literature and comic books in particular, with their thought balloons, even though they tend to do them as narrative boxes now, you get inside the head of characters in a way that you don't in other ways. So you could have somebody who's watching a TV show about a gay character, and this person's own prejudice keeps them from investing and caring about what happens to that character. They're reading literature and they're already inside of the head of the character, maybe even before they find this out about the character, and they learn to think of this fictional character as a human being, and it can challenge their preconceptions in ways that they wouldn't have expected to.
Interesting. So it could be actually a boon for society.
And with something like comic books, you've got something that is aimed at an audience, many of whom feel a little bit on the edge, disenfranchised. They don't tend to think of themselves as the jock. There are plenty of jocks who are reading comic books. We don't want to, push the stereotype there. But you do have people. In fact, what got me into this, in 2007, the first time I visited Comic-Con, I went to this environment that celebrated differences that might ostracize people somewhere else. And it was just seeing these people, happy and something helping their self-esteem where they might not get that elsewhere. And I knew it's like, I need to be part of this.
Interesting. So you actually boost self-esteem. That'd be a good study for a doctoral student someday.
And I've done some research on it. I've had students of mine, and we did a project for several years taking them to Comic-Con to administer surveys like self-esteem inventories to people
Oh,
at Comic-Con, and then email them later on, and showed their self-esteem was higher when they were at Comic-Con.
fascinating. It's almost like therapy.
Yeah, we don't do those now because when we were doing these 2007, 2008, it was a lot easier to get people in line to fill out surveys. Now they're all there on their phones. It's like they're too busy on their phone to do a survey.
Yeah, that's a whole different show. All right, so let's learn about this guy. How do we start off with Batman? What did you find out that really intrigued you?
Adam West once asked me if I thought Batman was crazy. We did a convention panel together in 2009.
Oh, fun.
And we were walking back to his booth afterwards. He said, I hate to use a word as crass and informal as this, but in your view, your professional view, knowing these things, is Batman crazy? And so Adam West once asked me if I thought Batman was crazy, is also the first line of chapter 1. It was the first line of my letter to get an agent and get a publisher. It's cool to be able to say that.
That is very cool.
You have to judge him for the context of the world he lives in. You look at our world. Are there people who've had times when they needed to conceal their identities to do the right thing? Yes. Are there people throughout history who've had occasions when they were dealing with such a corrupt system, a system that had failed so severely that people who weren't the authorities needed to stand up to evildoers? Yes, these things have happened in the world. Do you have people who, take on symbols to inspire others? Yes. All of these things have happened. You just have to think in terms of the context. You've got to judge the character for the context in which he's presented. Each of the movies, they present a world that needs someone to do something a bit crazy seeming to shake things up. The summer I had my book came out, there was a psychiatrist who wrote to me. He had written a journal article saying Batman has PTSD. And it came out the same month as my book. And so he wanted to argue with me because I said Batman does not quite have PTSD. He has some definite symptoms, but he does not meet some specific criteria for it. And he wanted to argue with me about this. He said, well, okay, in Batman Forever, okay, if you want to diagnose the Batman Forever version, diagnose that specific version, but that is not the normal version of the character. If you want him to just say Batman has PTSD, you're making a very broad statement about what the character's usually like, and you've got to judge him for the role he's in. And we went back and forth in our email exchange, and he finally said, well, if this guy came into my office showing these behaviors, it's like, okay, if he came into your office, he'd be doing it in our world. That's not where we're judging Batman. We've got to judge him for the world he's in, and he's in one really crazy world. He's in a world that with the most corrupt police system, in America is how it's depicted usually. And where there are some strange things going on in that town, although they're going to get even stranger after he puts on his costume and some of these strange criminals get inspired to wear unusual outfits themselves. But judging him for the context of the world he's in, no. He's doing some unusual things. He knows there's something crazy about what he's doing. He knows it takes some crazy seeming behavior to do what we need to do and shake things up. He's making a choice to dress like a bat. He doesn't think he's a bat. He knows. When people sometimes say, well, who's the real person, Batman or Bruce Wayne? And I understand the question, but to me, it's a false dichotomy. Batman is Bruce Wayne.
So he's not delusional.
There's the Bruce Wayne act. It's like, acting, indifferent to some things. But there's also the Batman act, the extra scary Batman who has to be larger than life, who can't show that he can be hurt. So there's a bit of an act with both. You see him as who he really is when he's down in that cave by himself, or maybe talking to Alfred with the mask back, part of the costume on, and he's the same person. Batman is Bruce Wayne.
So he's not
the
delusional.
mission is his life. He's not delusional. He knows what he's doing. He's choosing to do these things. There is a bit of compulsion to it, but he's walking a fine line on these things. On the issue of PTSD, for example, because this is one people want to debate with me. It's specific symptoms. Yes, he has recurring intrusive thoughts about the incident, the murder of his parents from when he was a child. He underwent a trauma, obviously. But like those recurring intrusive thoughts, they don't get in the way of doing what he needs to do.
Would
He
you be
does not
safe?
show he does
Right.
not show behaviors like avoidance. He does not avoid reminders of the incident. He seeks them out.
And can those people who are diagnosing him with PTSD maybe be falling prey to what they call availability bias? The comic books may only be showing the times he's having these recurrent thoughts, but they're not as many times as we really think they are.
So that's an excellent point too. Of course, that's all we have to judge by. Then again, that's all any therapist ever has to judge anybody by. Whatever's the presenting information. And say, here's this little tiny little snippet of life that you're supposed to diagnose them in this one session because your medical insurance thinks that it should be as easy to diagnose as a cold.
Won't be that easy. So you were saying something. He's got some kind of obsessive. Does he have compulsive disorder as well? I mean, is he OCD or
No,
neurotic?
that's what I said. He walks a line. He feels incredibly driven, and there are times when he's pushing himself too far. And so as I said, he walks a line, not to the level of not being able to control, but there are times when he's pushing so hard, and he will sometimes drive people away because he gets so wrapped up in the details of what he's doing, and that at some point or other he drives everybody in his life away. They all come back because that's how comic books work. It's like, okay, we need the drama of driving somebody off,
And do you?
but he is in control. He knows what he's doing. Where there are the less healthy aspects, he's conscious of them.
Interesting. So, what motivates Batman the most? Is it the justice, the seeking of justice for his parents being killed? What do you think is really motivating him?
Yeah, different writers will discuss this too. Some take the view that it's about revenge. His main thing is to go seek out somebody to fill in the void. Every thug he slugs is a substitute for the man who killed his parents. And that's in there, but that's not the main thing. The first thing is to keep others from going through what he went through. If he has a choice between saving this person over here or stopping that criminal over there, he's going to go save that person. The Punisher, he'd be focused on getting the criminals. The Punisher is out there taking out his anger on the world about revenge. Batman is his first thing that he's about, even more than justice itself, is keeping other people from going through the things he went through.
Last question here before we get to the fastball question. We have a couple of minutes before the show's over. Graphic novels, movies, comic books. Do you think Batman's personality is similar in those, or do those different mediums change his personality because of the audience they're trying to reach?
We can't exactly say the Batman because there's so many different takes and different variations on the character. It is true. The Adam West Batman is not exactly the same as the Christian Bale Batman.
Little difference.
Little difference there. But there is a common thread. There's a core that runs through them all. He is Bruce Wayne. He is this millionaire decades ago, but now, inflation, he's a billionaire, who is driven by the murder of his parents, inspired by that to go fight the good fight criminals. Even the Adam West TV show referred to that murder 2 or 3 times, although every time they did it in the context of that campy show, when dastardly criminals killed my parents. But he used that word dastardly every time he referred to it. But it's there. There is this core. There's this essential character where his strongest trait is his sheer persistence. Batman does not give up. No matter what version of Batman you have, if he's someone who gives up, then you go, that's not really Batman. So there is a core. There's a thread to this character. Like you read the different versions of Robin Hood myths, and there is a core to the character, even though there's some big differences on how Robin Hood's written. I mean, sometimes he's a murderer, he is a bandit, and other times it's all about making sure you don't hurt the innocent, and you don't kill anybody unless they drew first, although with bow and arrow. But there is a core quality to that character of Robin Hood. If he does not use bow and arrow and rob from the rich, he's not Robin Hood. With Batman, if he is not dressing like a bat and fighting criminals to protect others, he's not Batman.
Are you ready for your fastball?
Sure.
All right. We know Batman has a humanitarian heart. So that makes me start thinking about donating to causes, helping the people who are less fortunate, making me think of a Democrat. But he's got a lot of money. And he probably doesn't like taxes. So now it makes me think of a Republican. Is he a Democrat or Republican? Or maybe even independent?
I've thought about this. It's my big thing is comparing him to Tony Stark and think about the difference between him and Tony Stark. Tony Stark, absolutely Republican. Boy, Tony Stark has to be a Republican. Batman is for gun control, so there's a Democrat issue. I think he's inclined toward Democrat. You'd be hard to find specific issues where he's obviously Republican. It's not hard to find specific issues where he's obviously Democrat. He is actually for gun control. They don't address this a lot, but it is there. He does all these things to go for the underdog. He gives up massive amounts of money to help the common folk. He does charitable. You have plenty of Republicans doing charitable acts. I don't want to overstate that, but we do know there are certain types of charitable acts that one will prefer over the other, and Batman seems more in line with the Democrats.
Hello, my name's Matt, and I'm an addict.
My mom was addicted to prescription pills when I was very young, before I even turned 1.
Are you or someone you know struggling with alcohol or drug addiction? Has everyone given up on you or your loved one? The caring staff at Elite Care understands and treats you as a whole person. We offer individual and group therapy, holistic healing such as yoga, nutrition, and spirituality, medication management, and PTSD treatment. By building upon your strengths and rebuilding broken bonds, we help you begin a successful life. With our staff of licensed psychotherapists and doctors, you can be assured of the highest level of care. Elite Care is the best option for long-term rehabilitation from drugs and alcohol. Contact 888-511-0607 for more information.
So part 1 was very fascinating as we delved into Batman and found out his history a little bit and what different modes of expression of Batman and what he thinks like. Today I want to see if we can kind of look at Batman as well as superheroes in a general sense. So I want to take it back. I want to start making you think like a psychologist here in the psychodynamic version for those psychology students out there. Were there any common themes in child rearing that you saw in Batman or maybe other superheroes? Because it seems like they always have some kind of traumatic event that pushes them, gives them the impetus to go forward.
They used to not all have those traumatic stories.
Oh.
But it was so successful with certain characters, Superman, Spider-Man, Batman, that more recently they've started retroactively inserting that into everybody's background. It's like on the Flash TV show, he's driven by someone having mysteriously murdered his mother. That's a relatively recent introduction into the Flash's history. That wasn't there through most of the history. The Green Lantern, when he was a kid, he saw his father, a pilot, die when a plane exploded. That's a relatively recent thing in his history as well. Because it works so well with these big ones, the big three, Batman, Superman, and Spider-Man, you see it introduced in a lot of the histories retroactively where it didn't necessarily need to be there. You do see a whole lot of them are orphans. I asked Stan Lee about that once. I asked him, it's like, why are so many of these characters orphans? And he said it wasn't really that he was trying to, make it be where the orphan heroes. It's just, he didn't really have any parents he wanted to write about, and parents get in the way. But with Superman, Spider-Man, and Batman, with each of these, you do have something tragic that's important in their origins, but in different ways. With Superman, his whole planet blows up. But he's not driven by that because he doesn't even know about that until adulthood. Superman doesn't know where he comes from through most of the history of the character. He generally did not know where he came from until he was reaching adulthood. And then he found out, and when he finds out about the destruction of Krypton, it's like ancient history. It's not the thing that drives him. Superman is driven by the fact that he happened to get the best adoptive parents on planet Earth, and they raised him to do the right thing. It also seems to be inherent in his character. If you see other versions, like, well, what if he landed in Soviet Russia? What if he landed in Nazi Germany? What if he got raised by Lionel Luthor? But in every one of these, he's trying to be somebody's champion. So that seems to be in his own personality, who he was born to be. It was that. And he got raised by good parents in the main version. Spider-Man, he was pretty selfish at first, and then he makes this mistake that leads to his Uncle Ben getting killed, and the guilt over that is what drives him. Batman, where he has some elements of guilt, it's normal level survival guilt, which is not exactly realistic because a little kid couldn't have done anything to have stopped his parents from getting killed. But it is normal for survivors to feel some guilt about that. He's not driven by the guilt the same way Spider-Man is. Batman is driven more by just the sheer pain he went through and wanting others to not go through that. So it's not that he's making up for something the way Spider-Man is making up for something. But with these big ones, you have these critical things, these defining moments, which help people remember the origins of these characters too. You ask most people, what's the origin of Wonder Woman? They have no idea. Even name a defining moment for Wonder Woman, and people have trouble with that. Before the Green Arrow TV show, ask anybody Green Arrow's origin. It's like they barely knew. Okay, he's some guy with bow and arrow, right? Because of the TV show, they know more about his background. But with their big things, it's like a flashbulb memory. Like, where our parents were when they heard that JFK got shot. Where we were when we heard critical moment. We get these flashbulb memories, these things that burn into us. And it's like that in the origins of these characters. One key thing that's so dramatic, Superman rocking away from an exploding planet. Bruce Wayne and his parents there as the parents are getting gunned down. Spider-Man, the moment he realizes this is the burglar that he failed to stop, the moment he realizes it's his fault Uncle Ben died. Those key moments we relate to as human beings. They're very memorable, especially like Spider-Man and the guilt. We relate to that. Batman losing his parents. We don't all worry about our parents getting assassinated, but we do worry about common street crime. We worry about losing our parents. At some point, we all learn that our parents can and will die. So those writers, the writer Bill Finger and the official creator Bob Kane, when they had it be just an everyday street crime that killed Batman's parents, and that's what drives him, we can all relate to that. They tapped into just one of the most primal fears we've got.
That's absolutely true. That's exactly what I was thinking in my head. Did a great job on that. Just for clarification purposes, the additions of some of these pasts that you said about Flash and Green Lantern, were they in the original stories, or were they just not as prevalent in the original stories?
No, I mean, they weren't there. The Green Lantern thing got added with his father dying in the plane explosion. That got added by a writer named Jeff Johns just a few years ago. And Flash's mother getting murdered got added also by Jeff Johns about 3 years ago. For most of their history, these are guys who wound up with these powers, and they were just people who decided they needed to do the right thing with those powers. Len Wein, that's how he pronounces it, Wein, it looks like wine. He created Wolverine, he created Lucius Fox in the Batman mythos. Len, he didn't like those changes with Green Lantern and Flash. We were doing a panel one time, and he got, some people are going to do the right thing just because that's the kind of people they are. And that's what his feeling about Green Lantern and Flash is. It's like they're the kind of people who are going to do the right thing.
We're going to continue exploring Batman's personality and some of these other superheroes. There's one resonating theme that I see, and maybe these are more in the comic books in my day. I'm not as up to speed in the newest comic books, so you might have to enlighten me on this. But there seem like all these superheroes, especially, we'll take Batman, Spider-Man, and Superman, the top three guys. There seems to be, how would you say, a certain decorum that they all possess. There's no cursing. They're gallant, they're chivalrous with the women. Why is that? Do you think that's something that they were trying to do? Or is it something they want to typify as a superhero?
Oh, some of that will just have to do with the fact that comic books were being sold to kids. They had a Comics Code Authority to worry about for a lot of years. More recently, There will be characters, although it'll still usually be in the squiggly comic book cursing symbol language. But they'll have character. They will swear. Especially out of those three, especially Spider-Man, not so much Superman. Batman rarely. I think Batman is so controlled. I think with him, it's also an issue of control. He's not one who's going to curse very freely because that's like a sign of losing control. Spider-Man, he'll cuss a little more. Not a lot. Wolverine cusses a lot. The Punisher cusses a lot.
Oh, the Punisher, yeah.
So some of the more recent ones will. Some of the more violent ones will, but not all. So there is just some having to do with the audience you're going for and what you're going to say in these publications and what seems heroic. Because there are plenty of heroes who will curse. Dirty Harry, he would not refrain from whatever seemed the right word for the situation for him. And then the era of Dirty Harry is when you see characters like Wolverine and the Punisher start to emerge in the comics. You saw more violent characters. Also, the readership was getting older. Although originally everybody read comic books. In the early 40s, World War II, everybody read comics. A huge portion of the comics were going to soldiers overseas. And then they came home, and the audience was mainly kids. And so they geared the comics more to the kids, especially with some backlash. Dr. Frederick Wortham, a psychiatrist, I as a psychologist always have to point out that it was a psychiatrist. Dr. Frederick Wortham, a psychiatrist, wrote a book called Seduction of the Innocent, in which he blamed juvenile delinquency in America on comic books.
That hurt.
He testified before the Senate, and in these hearings, he made a comment that compared to the comic book industry, Hitler was a beginner.
Wow.
They're always scapegoats. It could be rap music, video games, TV. At that point, comic books. Wortham, he would say, it's like, there's not one of these kids, these juvenile delinquents I worked with, who had not read a comic book. Well, they'd also all watch baseball games. It's at that era. Everybody had read comic books at that time. And so some of the backlash from that was also why the comic books became even more kid-friendly through the 50s. Then the 60s, America's getting some of its innocence shattered, losing some of its illusions over the course of the 60s, and the comic book readership grew up, and they moved into more serious issues toward the end of the 60s. And then the 70s, when you see a lot of the more serious issues, and it was getting to be where college students tended to be more likely to be the ones reading the comic books rather than the younger kids who used to. And then by the 80s, the majority of the readership are people who are grown. And so they changed the content of the comic books. It went back and forth. The readership got older, and so the content of the comic books changed to be appropriate for the older, and bit by bit, they leave the kids behind. And they end up losing a way to introduce kids to comic books. They don't have the stands full of comic books in the stores, like they did when I was a kid. And they don't have a lot of comic books even in, like Books A Million will have its comic book section. They're all DC now. Marvel has stopped sending their comic books to those stores. And
oh, wow.
They're losing their gateway to comic books. And so these younger individuals now who will spend, $3 for a ringtone, just the right ringtone, but aren't spending $3 on a comic book. It's not about the cost. It's a lot of different things on why, the younger readers aren't there as much, and it's going to keep affecting the industry. 10 years ago, 15 years ago, people in the industry were terrified. They were really afraid what was going to happen with the growth of the internet and the change in the readership and the decline in sales. They're a whole lot healthier now. The comic books sell better now than they did 15 years ago. And some of the companies, especially the bigger ones, have a whole lot of movie and TV income coming in.
Yeah. Well, I guess it's fair to say dastardly Dr. Wortham. I'm sure Adam West would probably say that.
Dr. Wortham got demonized by a lot of individuals. He was actually seems like he was a nice person in many ways. He would offer a free, or well, not exactly a free clinic. People nicknamed him Dr. Quarter because he charged everybody at least a quarter for treatment to make them take some responsibility for themselves.
That's a neat, novel idea. I like that. Well, we got a few minutes left. Relationship issues. We don't see a lot of these heroes with relationships. I know Batman toyed around a little bit with one relationship. So did Spider-Man, and so did Superman. Why is that? Do they get in the way?
It depends on the story. They don't have to get in the way. The Flash, for most of his history until they rebooted the storyline recently, he had the same girlfriend, Iris, who married him. They got married in the 60s and were married until relatively well. They were married until she died, but she got better and came back, and so they were married through most of his history. They've rebooted it now, so they're not currently married. They're at an earlier point in his history right now. But that worked very well. These other characters, Ralph and Sue Dibney, this detective team, he was a superhero. That worked. Spider-Man and Mary Jane were actually married for toward 30 years in the comic books, and so were Superman and Lois Lane until they got reset and changed in different ways. So it's okay, they're not married now, but they were married for some 30 years in comics. And it was a different challenge for writers. It's like, okay, how can we have this woman involved? But it's just a different kind of story. There are stories where it works very well, for the hero and the heroine to be staying together.
Or the last
Right
minute
now at DC Comics, Dan DiDio, who's in charge, says none of these heroes can be married. Because that doesn't work. We can't have them be happy.
Well, the last question here for the last minute is the fastball question. Once again, you hit the last one out of the park in segment one. Look, we see a clear divide between Republicans and Democrats, but there's also the same kind of, how would you say, emotion between the DC fans and the Marvel fans. Some people want to know, is Dr. Langley a DC fan or a Marvel fan?
Yes.
I thought that we might get something like that. All right. We'll hit that out of the park. That's a good one there. Thank you again so much, Dr. Langley, for being on the circle. That was fabulous stuff. Once again, I know everybody's going to want to get a hold of you. How do we get a hold of you?
I'm easy to find online. Look me up on Facebook or on Twitter. I am at Superherologist.
Remember, our motto is simple. Wherever there's psychology involved, we are there. See you next time, everyone.